Organized crime in the 1920s. First of all, what is organized crime? By dictionary definition, organized crime is criminal activities carried out by large and powerful groups, wide scale. In simpler terms, organized crime examples can be mobs or cartels. Organized crime became so popular in the 1920s due to Prohibition, which led to bootlegging alcohol and liquor and selling the product at their own prices without government regulation. Organized crime destroyed economies in America during the 1920s because it deprived the economy of much-needed taxes. It also led to people of power or political positions to get away with breaking the law while normal civilians were being fined and jailed. People of power or political positions could get away with participating in organized crime. Organized crime boomed in the 1920s and has continued to thrive into the urban areas and cities today. Due to organized crime, slums are created throughout cities.
When people think of organized crime, they think of Al Capone. He was undoubtedly the most famous mafia mobster ever to live.
Alphonse Capone was born into an Italian immigrant family on January 17, 1899 in Brooklyn, New York. At 14, Capone quit school after hitting a teacher and instead got his education by working for gangster Johnny Torrio in his street gangs.
In 1918, Al Capone was working as a bouncer and bartender. One night, he made a rude remark about a woman seated at a table at the club. Her brother was nearby and overheard it. The brother took a knife to Capone's face and slashed it several times. It was forever scarred, and that's how he earned his nickname of Scarface.
Capone married Mary May Coughlin on December 30th, 1918. 3 weeks later, their only child was born, Albert Francis Capone. Shortly after this, Capone moved from New York to Chicago to help Johnny Torrio run a string of brothels.
At the beginning of Prohibition in the 1920s, Johnny Torrio's boss, Big Jim Colosimo, was against the idea of bootlegging, but Johnny Torrio was all for it. He knew that there was a gold mine there.
Either Al Capone or Frankie Yale were rumored to have assassinated Big Jim Colosimo, allowing John Torrio to ascend to the top of the Chicago mob. Torrio appointed Capone as his right-hand man, and ultimately, upon Torrio's retirement, Capone took over the Chicago mob. It was 1925.
Al Capone dealt with his rival Chicago gangs with brutal violence. The most famous example was his 1929 St. Valentine's Day massacre of the Bugs Moran gang.
Capone wanted to be rid of his crosstown rival Bugs Moran, so he cleverly arranged to have Moran contacted by a bootlegger who offered Moran really good whiskey at a bargain price. That way, Moran and his gang were lured to a garage warehouse. When Moran's gang showed up, Capone's hired assassins from out of town staged a fake police raid. They were dressed as cops, and they ushered Moran's gang inside the garage, where they lined them up against a wall, pulled out their Thompson submachine guns, and shot them all dead.
Bugs Moran was a late arrival that day, to his good fortune, because he saw what he believed was the police raid going on, and he fled.
By 1929, Al Capone was the most famous gangster in America, and President Herbert Hoover ordered federal law enforcement to find a way to prosecute him to end his reign of crime.
Elliot Ness, a U.S. Prohibition Bureau agent, was sent out to Chicago to see if he could bust Capone on prohibition charges.
While Elliot Ness and his famous team of untouchables weren't able to put Al Capone away for prohibition offenses, they did destroy his bootlegging business. They finally got him on tax evasion.
On October 17, 1931, Al Capone was sentenced to 11 years in federal penitentiary.
Al Capone became Alcatraz's most famous prisoner, but only served about half of his sentence due to good behavior and his deteriorating health. He spent his remaining years living in his Florida Palm Island palace with his wife May, and died on January 25, 1947, at the age of 48.